you need to be excited when you're wrong.
Because you just leveled up.
You just leveled up and you just found an opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
And when you develop that neuroplasticity, your whole world changes. If you have negative emotions that cause negative situations in your life, a powerful thing is learning to recognize them as quickly as possible when they're happening and shorten the time from the triggering episode to when you can calm yourself back down or get back to a state you want to be in.
So when you have a healthy debate, it's greater than the sum of its parts. Because what happens is both two people, if they're willing to do this, they can come together as collaborators who are both trying to discover a truth.
The positive network is your lighthouse in the dark, where you can gain real world solutions to real world problems, where critical thinking and self sufficiency is championed, and where you, the people of this planet, can find the path and the power to stand up and make a world we're all happy to live in. Welcome to the Positive Network. I'm your host, Mike.
And I'm Andrew.
All right, Andrew, today our topic is the SOVRN Mind, point number 3 in the SOVRN Life Operating System. The human mind is probably one of the most misunderstood things that is out there. It is a miraculous tool, but it can also be a prison. Our minds have been trained by ourselves, by others, and a lot of us just don't know how to use them properly. Now, I'm not insulting anybody, but the way that our minds have been trained is possibly one of the greatest robberies of our lifetimes and our ancestors' lifetimes. What if you woke up to a reality where you realize that a lot of the thoughts and emotions are not ones that you've chosen? They're ones that have been put there by your family, they've been put there by your teachers, they've been put there by media and advertising. A lot of what we think has been guided into our subconscious, and that is running our day to day lives. Now, 97% of our actions, it can be argued up or down a few percent from there, are subconscious programs that we play out. Things that we just do because it's the easy way for us to get through life. Think about when you're driving into town. You may be thinking about a ton of things, and by the time you get to the grocery store, you hadn't thought about driving the entire time. That's a program, an example of a program that's playing out. This principle is exciting to talk about. We're going to open your mind to the next chapter of your life, help you take a little bit more control of your thoughts, one thought at a time.
All right. So, Mike, in the last two episodes, we talked about time and food. And now in this episode, what we're going to be doing is taking the time we freed up and then also that fuel source that we've secured and also cleaned up. And we're going to be using it to apply it to a better brain so you can have better outcomes in your life. So, what we want to do is think about powering up our brain, because everything you do, everything you build, every action that you take all starts as our thoughts in our mind forward. And it's critically important that we understand how to get the most out of our minds and how we can use them in a powerful way to improve our lives.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into some of the problems and some solutions. And we've picked a few introductory topics to add value to the listeners today. There's a vast number of topics when it comes to the mind. As we were going through them, we were again surprised. We review this stuff often, so we picked 2 or 3 here to go through. We wanted to start with critical thinking. Now, critical thinking in the book that you and I are co-authoring, it is one of the first things that's mentioned in the first few chapters, and we go into it. And it's really important in developing a sovereign lifestyle in following all the points of the Sovereign Life OS. Now, in society, we feel there's very low levels of critical thinking. People are very susceptible to the deluge of information that's coming our way. There's stuff coming from media, there's stuff coming from social media, our teachers, our influencers, our parents, like everybody has an opinion and they're pushing it out there, and it's easier than ever these days. And so with everything coming at you, it can feel extremely overwhelming. Everyone's just trying to get that attention. And if it's a topic that you yourself haven't put the time into critically thinking about and researching, you might find yourself running around repeating somebody else's facts without knowing enough about the topic to speak as an authority. You're essentially foregoing your critical thinking process, and you're not helping, you're not contributing to society. So it's super important that we bring back critical thinking So when facts come at you, like here's an example that hit me the other day when I was doing some research. How many of you listening know that the average human brain only uses about 10% of its capability, and that we've fantasized about maybe we open up if we could just open up that 90%, that other 90%, that would be the next stage of human evolution. Well, guess what? That is absolutely false,
Yep. I heard about that too.
right? And so when I was critically thinking and researching this, it
Yeah.
shocked me. And I said, so where did this come from? Well, Hollywood, as a big culprit of shaping minds and society, keep that in mind when you're watching movies. What is the intent of this movie other than the entertainment, have fun? Also comes from some thought leaders in antiquity. I think Einstein made a joke about he only uses 10% of his brain. He probably could and still invent some amazing things. But that example is one that maybe you, the listener, and many other people in your life may be accepted, and it got into your brain somehow.
Yeah, it sounds really nice because at first you're like, oh, wow, I have all this untapped potential and blah, blah, blah. But actually, if you look at it, the reason why you're only using 10% of your brain is because you're not juggling like flaming batons while doing high level mathematics, while writing a song, while like flipping a coin between the toes of your feet, while you're doing all these things. It's like those are all the different systems that your brain has control over, right? You've got your temporal lobe, your occipital lobe, your parietal lobe, and your frontal lobe, as well as the internal parts of your brain.
Yep.
And so very rarely do all of them need to be firing at the exact same moment. There's few things that do, like for example, actually playing the piano and music, that's been shown to highlight a lot of different parts in your brain all at once and strengthen the bridge between the two hemispheres called the corpus callosum.
Yeah.
So in theory, it sounds like really attractive, like, oh yeah, we only use 10% of our brain, but it's only because we're not doing all of the things at once.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But if you look at a specific zone, then those are going to have high utilization. So you can almost think of it more like different zones have different tasks, and you're probably not doing every task at the same time, but the one task you are doing, you're probably getting it's hard to say exactly, but it could be like 70 to 90% utilization.
Okay, so I know me and the listeners now, we're going to give you a 12-week challenge. We want to see you flipping a coin through your finger while playing piano, juggling some batons with your toes, doing mathematical problems. And then we're going to measure your beautiful brain. Deal? Challenge accepted?
Oh, man.
No? Okay.
Well, we'll need a really good safety disclaimer for anyone that, especially if there's like flaming batons.
Yeah, you're not doing it at my house. It's at your house. Yeah. Another problem blocking critical thinking, and this is a big one, is cognitive bias. It's a whole problem in and of itself.
Do you think you can maybe dive a little deeper into cognitive bias, like what you want to talk about it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so I also want your take on this too. How I view cognitive bias is it's a bit of a mind trap. So our brains naturally want to do things the easy way. They want to conserve power. And so if we have a belief or an understanding about a certain topic or something, and information comes at us, then we're going to try to accept the information that aligns with what we already know. We're going to go along and agree with things that are already part of our belief system or our identity. And typically we won't question that. It's just easier not to do that. And the problem is, like, some of these things might be cognitive biases or old pieces of knowledge or old systems you've put in place subconsciously to protect yourself or go through your life, and they don't serve you anymore. They also could hurt you. There could be things that you're doing that cause a negative outcome in your life, but you're still doing them because that's just what's set there. So that's one of the ways that I look at cognitive bias. It tries to rob you of going deeper into a thought process by just skipping over it and saying, this is what I know about it, and moving on. Like, how do you look at that, Andrew?
Yeah, actually, one way that I look at it is you could physicalize it into an analogy. So imagine you're like in a hunter-gatherer society.
Mm-hmm.
And you build out this like town, and you spent maybe generations building out a clean source of water, hunting grounds. Maybe there's a small plot of land that's fertile enough for you to grow food on. So essentially, you've put time and energy into building out infrastructures and ways for you to survive.
Yeah.
So then when someone gives you a new thought that challenges your established belief systems, it's kind of like maybe someone visits your village like they're marauders, and your body sees them as people who are going to threaten everything that you've built and everything you've put your life into. And you can't possibly think about letting that go, because if you did, then you have to start over again. And that's super scary.
Right. Okay.
So there's like this loss perspective. And they've actually done tests where they measured people who were told something that they didn't agree with, and it triggered very similar pathways, and it's in the amygdala where your fight or flight comes into. So it's like you're defending yourself.
Right.
It's a actual personal threat when our personal beliefs come under attack. And that's why you see people so vehemently, they can, if you say something that someone disagrees with, sometimes you can like lose a family friend that you've met, that you've have this long-term relationship with, over something really like silly
Right.
sometimes.
Okay. So I'm thinking about your example of, building up a little village, clean water source, in a field where you're, producing crops. And then maybe in another example would be somebody comes in from another village and says, plow up these other 2 spots of land and every year plant in a new location and rotate those crops. Well, if you've and your tribe have been doing one crop in one spot for 100 years, multiple generations, and then someone comes along and says, tear up all this land and move it. I mean, you could just completely reject that as well out of fear. Like we could starve next year,
Yeah.
and you would not open yourself up to, what is the possibility of incorporating this new thought process.
Yeah, it kind of goes into the ego part of our minds where, well, I've survived so far, so it's okay if I just keep on going this way, even if I could have a more optimal life.
Yeah. And so by not challenging your cognitive biases, by not re-examining your beliefs, you can steal a massive amount of opportunity out of your life, and you will never wake up to it. You'll never even know it. And that is a tragedy in and of itself.
I guess where I'm kind of going is, just because the majority of people actually think and believe something's actually correct, that guy who comes into the village, maybe he has some sort of knowledge that you don't have, and you might just flat out ignore it. Everyone in the village could be like, no, this guy's wrong, right? But he could actually be correct. And so I think if you look back in time, like Copernicus, Galileo, people like this, they were that one person saying, no, this is the way it is. And everyone's like, no, you're wrong, heretic, blah, blah, blah. And it turned out, oh, they were actually right. So I think part of critical thinking is being okay with being that one person that says, no, you are all wrong. And here's why. You obviously have to have good reasons and proof for this. But that's, I think, what it boils down to, is being able to think for yourself, to be able to come up with new and unique thought processes.
Oh, so Andrew, maybe give a little more context to, say, the Copernicus story. So what was he challenging humanity with, and why was it rejected?
Right. So at the time, we believed in a model where we were at the center of the solar system instead
Okay.
of the sun.
Right.
And that was kind of alignment with the way, I guess, people just naturally believe it's all about us, probably. So,
Right.
I mean, I wasn't alive back in the day, so it's not like I can tell you firsthand accounts or anything. But the story goes that basically he was proposing that we were actually orbiting the sun, and the sun was actually the center. And that really threw a lot of people off. And he got in a lot of trouble because of that. So he was critically thinking, and the people that didn't, check his facts and check his research and check to see what was supporting it were not.
They just
critically
immediately
thinking.
went to, no, you're wrong. I
They
reject this.
They just went
They were
right into their
still
cognitive bias.
They were still
Basically.
telling the joke, like, how many humans does it take to screw in a light bulb, and be like, just one, the world revolves around us. Sorry,
Nice.
dad jokes.
No, that's good. That's
Okay,
good.
okay. So a couple tips for developing critical thinking, and avoiding contributing negative information or false information to your family and your community. One is, if a topic doesn't impact your life, if it doesn't have a direct impact on you or your family or your community or your nation, that affects you in your daily life, don't talk about it. If you haven't spent a lot of time researching it and made yourself, a 10, 20, 30-hour researched person, like, just that's even surface level, don't talk about it. If you heard something on the news, remember, there's an intent to why the news station is telling you something. They want an outcome. There's a whole system there that we will dive into on a future episode. Just don't talk about things that don't have a direct impact on you. Like, don't be Mr. Sally Gossiper or whatever.
One thing is, if you do want to say something, but you're not an expert, what I will do is, if I have something to say, I'll premise it with, take this with a grain of salt. I could be wrong because maybe I have bad information, but here's how I feel about it. And then I can give my opinion without it necessarily being taken as I'm saying this as truth.
Beautiful segue to my second point: engage in healthy debate. So debate in before I really looked into debate, I thought it's, it's two people arguing with each other and somebody wins and somebody loses. And how I look at debate now is I've got another person across from me that knows things that I don't. I want to find the gem in their set of knowledge that resonates with me, that can add to me, make me a better person, make me more knowledgeable. And I want to go back and forth with that person without my ego being challenged and
Yeah.
have a good, healthy debate. Find out how they think, why they think that way. You don't have to accept it. You could accept all of it, none of it, a piece of it, but have that debate. You have no idea the impact you might make on their life or they on you.
So when you have a healthy debate, it's greater than the sum of its parts. Because what happens is both two people, if they're willing to do this, they can come together as collaborators who are both trying to discover a truth.
Mm,
And they both have two different philosophies, two different life experiences, two different sets of information to draw on to collaborate to find that truth. When one person believes something in error, this other person can correct them. And so, together, if you're trying to find a truth rather than to defend your position because you
yeah,
have to be right, even if you could actually be theoretically wrong, you need to be open to it's not about what you believe or what they believe. It's what you guys can find out together when you collaborate to find the truth.
great way of putting it. I had a mentor over a decade ago get it through my skull that you need to be excited when you're wrong.
Because you just leveled up.
You just leveled up and you just found an opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
And when you develop that neuroplasticity, your whole world changes. It's okay to be wrong. It's one of the most powerful things that you can do. All right. So, tip number 3: read. How many books did you read last year that weren't, science fiction or romance? How many books did you read on a topic that advanced something in your life that you want to improve? Was it 10? Was it 5? Was it 1? Did you not read a single book last year?
Hmm.
We'll repeat this a lot over the years. Someone might spend 40 years perfecting one thing in their life, and then they write a book about it, and it costs you 10 or 20 bucks to learn an entire person's life experience on a topic. That is a gift. And so if you aren't reading, you're not expanding your mind enough to put more information in to critically think. Part of critical thinking is you need more stuff in your head to think about, because if all you're comparing a topic to is one or two sound bites from not yourself or just one source, you cannot think about a topic. You have decided based on one line of code. Imagine one line of code is your entire knowledge on a subject. So read, and read often. Also, while you're reading, critically think about what you're reading. What is this author up to?
Yeah.
What are they trying to
I
sell
was just
me?
going to say that.
What are they trying to convince me of?
Yeah.
Are they trying to take me off of my path? Like, is this whole book a hunk of junk, but there's one gem in here that'll change my life? I read entire books and only one paragraph changes my life. Then go back and read it if that was an interesting book in 5 years, because you will be a different person and now 2 or 3 things apply to you. I have one business book I've read every year for 10 years.
What book is that?
It's by Vern Harnish, Scaling Up. And every time I read it, I'm at a different level of business development, a different level in my career and profession. And the stuff that I didn't understand means something totally new to me the next time I read it.
Mm.
So there's a few books out there that hit me like that. Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. There's a number of these books. And when you become a different person based on more information in and more critical thinking, the information means something different.
Mm.
So that's a very powerful thing with reading as well.
The way I see reading is each book has the potential to be a giant whose shoulders you can stand on.
Mm,
The one thing you do have to do is weed out between which books are going to be the giants and which are going to be the pebbles.
yes.
And so there's a lot more pebble books than there are giant books, but the giant books are so worth it if you can find them, because it can literally be an entire lifetime or even multiple lifetimes of learning given to you to, you can then climb up on the shoulders of that giant and then take things even further.
Yeah. So find people that you trust in the topics that you trust and ask them what they read. Like, get referrals to reading source. And what you're talking about with publishing nowadays is, yeah, we're writing a book as well. And it is a lot lower barrier to entry to write a book than it was a long time ago. So alongside our book, there's books of giants. We hope our book becomes a giant one day. But there's a lot of books where people literally just,
They just write a book to
put
write a
some
book.
stuff down out of their mind.
Yeah.
And so it's not that they're bad.
Mhm.
It's just you don't want to waste your sovereign time trying to find the really good ones that apply to you. And a book that means the world to me
Mm.
will mean nothing to some of our listeners and might mean everything to a few of them. It's your personal journey with reading and education. What
Yeah.
outcome do you want? If you don't have a big business, don't read a business book, I recommend. Read something more on spirituality, or read something on raising your children, or budgeting, or making money. The topics are limitless. You have to whittle it down to what are you trying to improve. The last point would be meditation. And I know you align with this as well very strongly. People think meditation is a Shaolin monk sitting on top of a mountain with their legs crossed and their arms out with their fingers touching and their mind is blank. Okay, that's a form of meditation. That's kind of tricky, and I don't do that. My form of meditation and many people's can be whatever you want it to be. I can mow my lawn with earmuffs on, listening to, say, a binaural beats. I have a very big lawn. I will do some of my deepest meditative thinking while mowing my lawn and destroying my blades because I'm not paying attention. Um, it can be out on a run. You can go exercise. Some people, when they exercise, they have some of their clearest, most organized thoughts. You can sit in a room and just pick a topic and roll it through your mind. What do you know about it? What do you not know about it? So, as Keith Cunningham, another mentor of mine, says, use thinking time.
Mm.
That's a form of meditation. You're going to read, you're going to listen to sources, you're going to talk to people, you're going to have debate. Well, then you got to sit and you need to integrate this.
Yeah, and actually today this is more important to hear than ever, because we are living in a time where you are always doing something with your phone almost
Mm,
all the time. Like, used to be, let's say you go to the grocery store, you're waiting in line, what do? You
you
think.
think.
Now, whip out your phone, start scrolling some social media or doing whatever. Mind is always on a wheel constantly. If you're in the shower, that's probably the only time you're not on your phone.
Some of Andrew's best thinking happens in the shower. Disclaimer.
Yeah, that's where I get some of my good ideas. But also, like, going for walks and these other things, you used to not be able to engage in any other process. But now you can be constantly bombarding yourself in your brain from the moment you wake up. You can pull your phone out to the moment you get,
Yep.
2 a.m. Your eyes are, blurry, and you're just like, oh, and then you fall asleep with your phone on your chest, and then you wake up and you pull your phone up again.
What
You're
have you
never.
what have you decided for yourself?
Yeah.
You've not sat with yourself and integrated anything that has come into your life.
Yeah, one of the ways I like to meditate is when I'm walking, feeling my heel and my toe rolling off the ground.
Mm,
Because you know how, so I learned this from another meditation app, actually. And so there's the breathing that everyone knows, like feeling your breath. And what I've gotten from that is, when you do meditate, what you're doing is sharpening your. It's almost like going to the gym for your brain.
right.
You're able to sharpen your ability to focus on something. And so if you can focus on something, then you can direct more energy, thought process, and thinking on tasks that you have to solve.
Mm,
You have more control over your brain, or it could be all over the place, left and right and up and down, and you can't focus on one single thing.
right.
So when you're walking, there's lots of different things you can do. You can, instead of just focusing on your breath, you can focus on your footsteps. You can focus on objects coming towards your field of view. Anything that helps you focus your attention on something. And also, when you focus your attention on something in the present, you're also keeping yourself from putting your consciousness in the past or the future.
Yeah. If the listeners want a good resource for this, and we'll do a whole episode on being in the now and being present, a book that changed my life was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And the ability, when you get that monkey mind you're talking about that's racing everywhere, to rise up above and observe yourself thinking and just look at that process and realize that, hey, that's not me. That's the tool of my brain going wild. I'm going to set that aside. And the book has a great process through it. That might be something that the listeners want to pick up and read. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Today, a lot of people say there's no such thing as common sense.
Yeah. Or maybe common sense just isn't common. Because I
Yeah.
think some people still do have it. It's just not a common thing,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
It's becoming less common, and that's a lot of the distraction and time taken from us, as we covered in episode 2 on sovereign time. That is mapped out, stealing our attention, very intentionally done to us.
Here's the interesting thing though. If you polled people, do you have common sense? I think the answer would be yes. So commonly people think they have common sense, but rarely do they actually.
And again, it's all perception in your own reality. So the
Yeah.
trick is just improve upon it.
Yeah.
If you think you're a critical thinker, great. That's not an excuse not to get better at it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so moving on to our next point here. So our next one is we're going to be talking about emotional regulation.
Ooh.
Yeah. So this is a big one. Why I wanted to include this topic was because it's something that we all struggle with. And sometimes we're in moments of our life where we're like, yeah, I got my emotions under control. And then your coworker places a coffee cup on your desk and you're like, no, and you like flip out internally. and then
First
you
world problem.
and then you realize that you're nothing more than a 5-year-old screaming,
yeah.
kicking and screaming inside, and you're just suppressing it from view so people don't see how out of control you are inside. I've had moments myself. A guy cut me off in a car one time. I was in a parking lot, and I got quite mad. Didn't do anything too crazy, but internally I was very, very upset. So
you had some thinking time. You ran some scenarios about it, didn't you?
Generally I'm a calm person, but there's one thing I noticed though is once I had kids, that's how I discovered how truly angry I could get. Kids have this way of finding the things inside yourself that really kind of just make you trigger.
Yeah.
Emotional regulation, whether you are, 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old. I've even seen 60 and 70-year-olds lose their emotional control. I think it's a timeless thing that we all need to constantly think about. And I don't think you're going to master it easily. Even knowing what we're going to talk about today isn't going to necessarily solve it, but it could give you some ideas on thought process and ways that you could actually improve it. So I'm going to use an analogy that I used with my son here.
Okay.
So my son was struggling with emotional regulation, as most 6-year-olds do.
Yep.
And so I wanted to think of a way to explain it to him. And he likes mechanical things. He loves building Lego. He likes building machines. So I was like, how can I build an emotion machine and stuff like that? So I came up with something, and they told him that emotions are like a fire. Okay. They can rage really big or they can simmer, but they're always there and they can always come back.
Right.
If the right conditions are present. If you add fuel to the fire and oxygen, boom, the fire goes up. Over top of that fire is like a boiling tank of a whole bunch of water. And so what happens is when your emotions get out of control, this could be fear, anger, or whatever, the fire starts raging and it starts to convert the water above into steam. And that steam gets routed into what we're going to call a pressure tank.
Okay.
Okay. And so you've probably felt this where you can feel the pressure rising in you and you're like, as you're getting mad. And so there's 3 different scenarios that happen. Okay. So this is assuming you can't control your emotions because that's the next thing, right? But what do you do with the emotions that you generated? So controlling that fire is like a next level technique. We'll dive into that a little bit more. That one's a lot harder, but what can you do when you feel the pressure building and something's spiraling out of control?
Yeah.
So try to think of there's 3 possible scenarios here. Scenario 1 is that you can let off the steam. So there's like a little blow off valve on the top of that steam tank. And what that is taking a deep breath, resetting your nervous system, calming yourself down, and
removing yourself from a situation.
Exactly. Removing yourself from the situation if that's possible. Sometimes it's not, like if you're held hostage in a car where your toddler is screaming in the backseat on a long drive.
Yeah, we've had those.
Yeah. So in those cases, you just have to have other strategies for blowing off the steam, soundproof headphones or whatever, or just lots of deep breaths and just remember the good times that are coming. Later. Not right now.
Not right now.
So anyways, so letting it off is the first one. The second is channeling all that pressure. So as we know, steam engines, we use steam to do a whole bunch of stuff. Like nuclear power plants are just steam
Yeah.
turbines. So you can create energy and do work with steam.
Yeah.
So just like you can be angry or fearful, this can give you a ton of energy, and you could direct it instead of blowing it off, you could direct it to do positive work.
Mm.
So you could think of different strategies or take different steps to make a positive impact where you are currently. The last one is, if you fail to do either of those and the steam keeps rising, then that pressure tank only has so much capability of holding it in, and then poof, you blow up.
Yeah.
And then when that happens, you react to whatever's going on and you start to do destructive things to yourself and those around you caught in the crossfire.
And those are those things that I and the listener, we've had in our past where you look back and you're like, man, I wish I wouldn't have said that, done that, sent that email, made that text, whatever that thing was, got into that altercation. That's when that steam tank explodes. And what happened was we didn't cut it off at that step 1 or step 2 with some strategies, and it just ran out of. And you look back at it in a calm time and go, who was that person? What in the world was I thinking? Well, you probably weren't thinking very much.
No.
As
no.
emotions go up, intelligence goes down.
Yes.
That's how those levers work.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool, Andrew, and thank you for sharing that perspective and that analogy. And when you talk about kids, I mean, that hits home for me as well. You know, if you have kids, you're listening to this podcast, great. If you don't, I think this will still make sense. But when I had kids, I started to realize as they're laying on the floor having a tantrum or looking at a simple situation and starting just crying or screaming for joy or happiness, kids before 7 years old have zero emotional regulation. They're in full theta wave, brainwave patterns. They're little geniuses learning everything, feeling everything. And as parents, and we'll get into this in the SOVRN Children part of the SOVRN Life OS, but as parents, one of our biggest jobs is to teach them how to manage their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happens if you got no emotional regulation training as a kid? Because I sure didn't get the full package. I don't know many of us did. I don't know if this is talked about enough. It's starting to here and there in little pockets, but
I know it's funny because we're all about, hey, there's orange and green and yellow and blue. Oh, but we're not going to talk about how to control those emotions of yours.
Don't cry.
Yeah.
Don't embarrass me.
I think
kids should be seen and not heard.
Yeah. That was a really big thing a few decades ago. We've gotten better at, I think, identifying the emotions.
Yeah.
But we don't talk a lot about how to regulate them.
Yeah. And so when my kids started going through their emotional ups and downs and creating emotional feelings inside of me, like frustration or anger or all these things, and I, as a conscious parent, stop and go, why do I feel this way? They're literally looking for support or they're looking for this. They don't know how to regulate their emotions. So my kids showed me how much emotional regulation work I needed to do. And this is only a few years old for me.
Yeah.
So this is something I put a lot of work and effort into, is going, holy cow, like I've got to address some of these things. When you're saying like the coffee cup on the coworker's table, like we live in a society in first world countries that most people don't have major threats of violence in their life. You're probably not starving to death in first world countries. So when your coworker at the grocery store, rips your bags up or hides your name tag and you literally think about inflicting violence on them. This is because our brain, that tool, is looking for what's wrong, and then emotional regulation comes in, right? We get angry.
Yeah.
We get sad. So emotional regulation is a huge part of mastering your mind.
Yeah.
And what I've learned in my studies of this, and we'll bring some experts onto the podcast in future episodes, is emotional regulation, you're probably not going to master it as in, I will never get angry, I'll never get sad, I'll never get happy. And that's not the point, and that's not
I don't think I'd even want to live. I wouldn't want to live a life like that where you're just like Spock and totally emotionless, right?
That's a ridiculous pursuit. But if you have negative emotions that cause negative situations in your life, a powerful thing is learning to recognize them as quickly as possible when they're happening and shorten the time from the triggering episode to when you can calm yourself back down or get back to a state you want to be in.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was having to explain this to my son, he didn't know what the word regulation meant.
Right. So we're talking about how,
So I was like, what is regulation? I was like, well, it makes things regular.
I like that.
That's how I explained it to him. I was like, so you have a steam tank, and as long as it's still regular steam tank, it's good. So regulation is the process of stopping that steam tank from blowing up and causing damage. So if there's excess pressure, regulation is getting rid of that pressure either by letting it go or by directing it to a positive action.
Bypassing it.
Because if you do not deal with it and the steam pressure keeps rising, it's not going to be a regular steam tank anymore. It is going to be a busted one.
So think about regulation as the time it takes for you to recognize you're in a state you don't want to be in, and the time that you can get back to a state that more fittingly suits the situation.
Yeah. So I think the key here is like a lot of people will feel shame, like, oh, why did I get angry with that? That's not emotional regulation. You can get angry, and it's how you deal with what happens when you get angry.
Yeah.
So it's like you get angry from your coworker doing something. How do you deal with it? Do you blow up? Well, you didn't regulate. Did you let go of the anger or find a way to constructively create some positive outlet for it? Good job. Now you've regulated it.
Yeah. Did you communicate that to your coworker and then they say to you, I had no idea that upset you. I will stop that. And you could be mad at your coworker for a year. You could quit your job because they're doing something that drives you nuts, and you never regulated to the point where you could feel comfortable saying, hey, when you do this, it really interrupts my workflow. It makes me feel like this. Can we find another way of doing it?
That thing blowing up, it can also, it's not like it only can explode outwards. This isn't going to work perfectly with this analogy, but we can also do damage and force it inwards, like an implosion, where instead of seeing the visible kind of blow up, we put all of that on ourselves and we keep doing damage to our internal self.
Slow suppression.
So that way people outside don't see it, because we don't want them to see that. Maybe there's some shame, or we're obviously scared of what the repercussions would be, and we know that would hurt them. So, okay, well, I'll just hurt myself and no one will know the difference. But the thing is as that damage is done over and over again, it does take a toll on you.
Are there any other things that people can do to, regulate their emotions, or anything else that, you found to be effective in your life when things come up?
Yeah. So maybe like I'll do some analogies of like, okay, let's go back to like the guy cutting me off in traffic, because, I already brought that up. So why not? Okay. So when they cut you off, the first thing you could do is, okay, let's see, could we release this? So you could close your eyes, obviously not if you're driving fast, maybe for a second.
Maybe in a Tesla.
Take a deep breath, grip the steering wheel, and then breathe out and just try to breathe that anger out. And then if that helps, continue on your way and try not to let that thing just stew in your mind.
Yeah.
If you feel like it's just not leaving, then that means you haven't really let it go. You actually need to go through that process, and then maybe you need some more deeper reflection on why you can't let that go. That could be
thinking time.
Yes, some thinking time. Think about, why did that bother you so much, and did it have something to do with your past, and that brought up some other emotions? Because a lot of times those really violent experiences that you feel inside, those intense emotions, it's not because it's the first time. It's because of a whole bunch of past things that have sort of stacked up over time, and then it was the straw that broke the camel's back, metaphorically saying.
You got a program that's trying to protect you from something that you may have even forgotten.
Yeah, exactly. You can also just get angry because you want to protect yourself from some other thing, like maybe a fear of loss or abandonment or whatever. Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why you could be getting angry. So if you can't let it go, that's a good reason to dig in more and figure out why. But if you have and you did, then just continue on your way. The other option is, if you feel like you just don't want to let it go at that moment, and you just don't feel like you can, because sometimes you're just not in the space to, try to direct that energy towards positive work. So you could use that as an experience to remind you about how to practice defensive driving. And so what you could do is be like, okay, I'm going to use that anger to be hyper vigilant around me for any other potential possible accidents or someone crossing my path. So just basically become more hyper aware around you.
Yeah.
So channel that energy to be like looking at everything around you, every possible, maybe a child comes out behind a car. So all of that alertness can be funneled towards something that would actually be positive, paying more attention to your driving.
And that can kind of bring us, as we wrap up this episode over the next 5 minutes or so, nothing has meaning in our existence until we apply meaning to it. And what I mean by that is, two people can see the same situation, such as an altercation between two people as an observer. And one person can look at that and say, that was horrible. I cannot believe that happened. How dare that person, be physical with that other individual? And then another person observing that same situation can be like, I am so glad that they stood up for themselves. What I saw was them defending himself and his family. And so these two people observing the same thing have a completely different experience of reality. So you can change that reality. We all assign the meaning to everything that we see. We share a reality, but we're all in our own realities. So you assign that meaning.
Mm,
That can lead you to argue that you can change your entire reality by reshaping those beliefs, reshaping these things through critical thinking,
yeah.
through that thinking time to integrate things, through getting new information into your brain from books and different sources and healthy debates.
That is actually the path to not having the emotion of anger in the first place.
Hmm.
That's how you control that fire that leads to the steam.
What usually leads to anger oftentimes is fear. And what is the famous acronym for fear? It's false evidence appearing real, which I always equate to I'm afraid of things that I'm ignorant of. I'm usually afraid of things that I think might hurt me. And it's usually I don't know enough about it. And as soon as I dive into that fear and sit in it and go, what do I not know about this?
Mm,
And then my researcher brain dives in and I learn as much as possible. I'm like, this actually isn't that scary now that I know more about it.
yeah.
I don't like it. I don't choose to have it in my life, but now I'm not as afraid of it. Or I completely changed my thought process on it.
So, wrapping up here, the point that I want to make is that your brain is a multi tool. It's responsible for generating wealth. It helps you to create a successful career or business. It also is the tool that you use to build and create a successful, loving family. And so, you can either learn to master this tool, or your brain will just run you in circles. So, don't be running around with your head cut off. Master your mind.
I love that, Andrew. So let's list off a few critical actions our listeners can take.
Yeah, so I think you could start by just studying more about your brain. And so I'm going to list off a few good books. The first one is called The Gap and the Gain. You actually are a big advocate of this book. Maybe you could summarize it in just a couple sentences.
Yeah, Dr. Benjamin Hardy, a colleague of mine in one of my networking groups, he's written several amazing books. And this one essentially is a measurement tool for you and your brain in giving you perspective of where you've come from. So when you get really, down on yourself or hard on yourself on your goals and where you're going, what we don't do is we don't look back to ourselves a year ago or 10 years ago and look, where were you 10 years ago versus
Hmm.
where are you today?
Yeah.
And so if you have been accomplishing goals and setting them, it's great to give you perspective on how far you come. If you're floating through life and just accepting everyone else's instructions and thinking, and everyone else is thinking for you, then you might notice, hey, I'm exactly where I was a year ago.
Yeah.
And so it's a good reflection process called the gap in the gain.
It's a really easy book to read. It's small. And what's really cool is it's super impactful, because let's say you've never done any real like mind training before.
Yeah.
If you look at where you are in a certain context and you're frustrated, and then you apply this, you can suddenly be grateful and your entire emotion set changes like instantly.
Yeah.
So it's a good
Gratitude is powerful.
yes, it's such a good tool for dipping your toe in the water to understand how much you can get out of just a mindset change and
Yeah.
learning about how your brain works.
Love it.
The next one is more technical. This one's called 1,000 Brains, and this is a more scientific deep dive into how your brain is actually structured. It's actually structured into cortical columns, and your neurons actually vote on outcomes that are probable in a democratic way. It's super fascinating.
I
Yeah,
haven't read this one.
it's a really, really cool book, and it's up to date with the latest stuff in neuroscience.
Nice.
There's actually stuff in neuroscience now that is outdated, and a lot of people still think it's true, but it's actually been proven wrong. So 1,000 Brains is fantastic. Couldn't recommend it more. Then there's another one called Thinking Fast and Slow. That's just a standard book that's really highly recommended. You can pretty much find it anywhere.
Yep.
Then there's another good one called The Power of Habit. And this one is good because it takes a different approach. It talks about what you're doing subconsciously and kind of like running on autopilot. And it can be pretty powerful to change your habits, to change your life.
Yes, subconscious habits are key.
Yeah. So these are really great books to just kind of like kick you off. And then lastly, the additional thing I'd recommend is, if you haven't already started doing this, try just introductions to meditation. It might seem, if you've never done it before, you're like, oh, isn't that just like, a reason to not think? It's like, no, there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
Just you got to try it. It's one of those things. It's kind of like VR. You can't watch a video about what it's like to be in a VR headset and know what it feels like. You have to actually experience it yourself. And so same thing with meditation is you won't know how it feels unless you try it yourself first.
Excellent.
Yeah. So thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Positive Network podcast.
Where we as the people of this planet find the power and the path to stand up and create a world that we're happy to live in.